Hello. It's been a little bit since I've made content like this, let alone played something like this. I am currently going to be participating in a Pokemon Draft League. I believe the last time that I've played was about 3 years ago at this point. Um, and I kind of just wanted to walk through my thought process. Even is one here. My thought process behind my draft. Um, my idea was really just to build balanced team realistically. Or at least as close to that as I could get with what other people were drafting. Um, because I have someone who is building a stall. So between Hoopa Unbound and Gothitelle, those are basically my stall checkers between those two. And Hoopa Unbound is just, I believe, generally very good. Especially if you're drafting it as a balanced offense team. Because of the fact that I can flex it into either a balanced attacker, and if I don't do balanced attack, I could do physical attack or special attack, whether I do specs or band. Alternatively, I could do a vest and just go to whatever for that for balanced attack as well. So yeah, there's a bunch of different offensive options for Deoxys Speed. I plan on using it as essentially a pivot in some matchups, and in others as a setup sweeper, setup attacker. On average, it's probably going to be a decent knockoff user or knockoff user into switching off or switching out. At this Smogon, it's very fast in the format. Setup sweeper and a dedicated lead. I don't really plan on using it as a lead because I think I have enough of decent leads as it is, unless I needed specifically a psychic lead, depending on the opponent's team, in which case I would bring it as a lead. But I think lead-wise, I'm heavily covered in most matchups between Chi-Yu, Hoopa, and Buzzwole. Alternatively, as a setup lead, I could do Gothitelle. My plan overall here is, so I have not necessarily two Mon cores, but similar things, or at least that's the plan. Or Pokemon that can flex into a bunch of different positions. One of the few ones that I think can't really flex very well is Fletchinder, but it is a flex Mon, if that makes sense in my opinion. I drafted it as what I would have drafted its evolution for. Its evolution being shit, not Fletchinder, what's it called? The evolution of it. I think it was an 8-point or 9-point Pokemon. I'll find it. Sorry, I'm looking for it on here somewhere. But Talonflame. So yeah, a 9-point Talonflame versus a 1-point Fletchinder, where with Fletchinder, I'm saving these 8 points, and if I had Talonflame, I'm only using it as a Tailwind setter into sacrificing it with chip damage. And with Fletchinder, it saves me those points, and the reason why I was looking at those Pokemon in general, actually, I forgot I had it open over here. Gale Wings. If it's at full HP, its flying type moves have Prio increased by 1. So essentially, I get a priority Tailwind that isn't affected by opposing dark Pokemon, as it would have been with Prankster. So, where is the Tailwind? There it is, Tailwind. So my plan is, on average, if I do bring this Pokemon, I'm going to lead it. Run it with Tailwind, Tailwind turn 1 into turn 2 Toxic or U-turn. Toxic would be longevity, like chip damage for there. Alternatively, I could do Swagger and hope that I could have them hit themselves, but I do think on average it's going to be Tailwind, Toxic. I could do Taunt as well if I see them setting up, or if I foresee them setting up, rather. I could do Tailwind, Taunt, or Tailwind Toxic. Those are the main two options. And then just sack it into switching into an offensive lead that matches up well into whatever Pokemon they're going to have in at that moment. So if I think that they're going to see what I'm doing, know what I'm doing, I go Taunt, and then because I have Taunt up, they can't use status moves, which means that they can't use things like Calm Mind and that sort of stuff. Additionally, they can't get a substitute up if I Taunt. And with Tailwind, my speed is doubled, so I don't need too much of a speed investment on Fletchinder to essentially outspeed everything in the format during Tailwind. So again, plan is hold a Focus Sash to survive one hit, get my Prio Tailwind up, and then chip damage either through Toxic or remove their ability to do status damage via Taunt. At least that is my plan with Fletchinder. And then just switching into another Pokemon. As an example, in my mind, I think a decent lead would be Fletchinder into Ursaluna. And if my Gothitelle is... Well, Gothitelle is more of a setup sweeper on average, but as an idea, Fletchinder into Ursaluna or Fletchinder into Buzzwole for attack-type leads that might need some of that additional help with that speed. Otherwise, I could do a Fletchinder into Hoopa Unbound if I'm running that either as a mixed attacker or if I'm running Hoopa as a special attacker. Obviously, this is all dependent on my current opponent's team and what I think they might be bringing. It depends on their defensive types, because obviously I'm not going to bring a whole bunch of physical attackers into a physically defensive team. I'd rather have something like a mixed attacker Hoopa, or if not mixed attacker, then I could just do straight up special attacker Hoopa. So Fletchinder Sack Hoopa, or Fletchinder Sack Ursaluna. And speaking of Ursaluna, my plan is, as I'm sure, it's either going to be, as it says here, an attacker or wall. With Guts, Facade, Ursaluna, it's very just gross as an attacker. So that's a decent option. I wouldn't necessarily say I would lead it just because of its slower speed stat and its reliance on Flame Orb if it is the lead. Obviously, again, everything is dependent on my opponent's matchups. So if they have a type matchup that is on average based off of their Pokemon, their team, that isn't likely to have that like good type matchup into Ursaluna, obviously I'm leading Ursaluna. Get that Flame Orb proc turn 1, turn 2 Facade, and just go. Alternatively, there is the, again, bulky wall where instead of going for something like Flame Orb, we go for Assault Vest and just go for a bulky, even bulkier, rather, attacker and skip Facade and go for other types of stab moves and potential other type matchup check moves. Potentially a utility move such as Roar if we have... what's it called? I forget what it's called, like rocks and those entry hazards, if we have any entry hazards set up. And then again, as I said previously, Deoxys Speed, really mostly just a either setup sweeper or I'm going to plan on using it as a pivot. Chi-Yu, another decent special attacker, not so reliant on having speed, but the fact that I have this Fletchinder does mean that it is much more okay for me to run this Chi-Yu fully special attack with minimal speed investment and not having to run it with something like Choice Scarf. I could truly just run it Choice Specs. And if I run it Choice Specs, it's going to be much more useful into a lot of different matchups versus Choice Scarf because I have this Tailwind Fletchinder that has this Prio. It makes it much easier for me to bring Choice Specs Chi-Yu, basically, because I don't have to invest as much in speed if I need to invest at all, depending on my opponent. That's really the case with a lot of these Pokemon. Like, they have decent speed on average, but even without this, like, decent average speed, it requires a minimal investment because of the potential of this priority Tailwind, that they would be a good... Essentially, I'm sacking Fletchinder to get a very strong start. In my opinion, if I have knocked out one of the opponent's Pokemon during this time that I have this Fletchinder Tailwind up, then I've done my job realistically with Fletchinder. Ideally, the hope is to do just one knockout, if not 2 knockouts. And if it's just that one knockout, it's going to be knockout and chip damage, ideally. And alternatively, even if it's not chip damage, getting that status, as an example again, with that Toxic or that Taunt is just as good a lot of the times. I do have Gutra Hisui. It's really just there for additional speed control with GUI and as a special defensive wall. Gothitelle is a Shadow Tag user on average. It could be a setup sweeper again into that stall team. Even though I do have a stall breaker in the Hoopa Unbound with its special move, or rather its specific move. Yeah, which one it is, but it should be somewhere in here. Niche moves, primary moves. There we go, Hyperspace Fury. So because Hyperspace Fury goes through Protect type effects, it breaks stall on its own, basically. So Hyperspace Fury, and a lot of the times, even if I'm not going pure physical attack, I'm running that anyways, just because if I'm not running pure physical attack, I'm likely running a mixed attacker with Life Orb or with Assault Vest. I could run it as a setup sweeper as well, again, as it shows here. With Combined, it's very decent. Also, obviously, Gothitelle, again. Florges. This is another special defensive Pokemon, because I realized during my draft that a decent amount of my Pokemon were very defensive, just physically. And I believe I pivoted closer into that with Buzzwole. So I had a lot of balanced, and I didn't have a lot of physical defense, and I still don't, unfortunately. So I do think that's going to be one of my bigger checks into me is physical defense. Especially if someone were to bring something that checks both Buzzwole and is a physical attacker. Being completely honest, that would be an unfortunate thing. But my hope is that I can ideally outplay a lot of that with just my Terra types, and also I have certain Pokemon like Bruxish. You wouldn't normally see that most likely, but my plan is Bruxish and these types of Pokemon. A lot of them are pretty decent, not necessarily typing-wise, but as a revenge attacker is basically what I plan on using Bruxish as. Just because, so like Strong Jaw, and it has a whole lot of just, even outside of its stab moves, it has a whole lot of coverage moves with Choice Band and things like that with this Strong Jaw. It is very, very, like, surprising how much damage it can do. Even if you were to run it purely as just all attacking moves and, like, nothing defensive with Strong Jaw and, like, 4 different biting moves, you still have all of this coverage, and you are very likely, even outside of your own typing, or what your Bruxish's type is prior to Terra, just KO. And with Terra, if you don't think that you have that damage, or if you calc it and you don't have that damage, a lot of times with that Terra Choice Band and whatever biting type move you have, it will more than likely KO if you have that super effective. And if it's not super effective, you can also just do, again, the Strong Jaw with a biting move with a neutral effective move. As an example, if I go Terra Psychic, Strong Jaw, and I think it's Psychic Fangs, it breaks through screens, but additionally, I think it's 75 base power, times 1.5 realistic power, then we have the stab from Psychic, and then double stab from Terra, so 2x stab, essentially. So we're doubling the base power and then 1.5 times in the base power. In addition to just that regular 75. So 75 times 2 times 1.5. So I don't know if it's cumulative or multiplicative, but either way, it does an obscene amount of damage as long as you are attacking neutral. And that's insane. Like, I think it's very, very useful. And I've heard within this league, again, I haven't played Pokemon on, I have no clue how long, I think 3 years again at this point. But I've heard that this has had success from another player previously named Chef. I'll probably link their, or rather I will link their YouTube in the description below. Additionally, before all of this, I was planning on taking Terra Komala instead of Terra Bruxish, but a lot of my Pokemon that I had planned for just got sniped. But again, a lot of the times I think a lot of that was realistically a blessing in disguise. just because it gave me a lot more time that I had to think and rethink my team, to the point that now it's not that I have perfect type coverage, but it is much better than what I had initially planned on. Initially with the Florida Drizzlers, I was planning on running a rain team or just a weather team of some sort, and then I realized that probably wasn't the best idea, so I round one Chiyu, which would be completely separate from that rain team. But I do think that that round one Chiyu is probably to my benefit just in general, just because I feel like leading with that strong Pokemon that doesn't really need too much setup behind it is very useful. But a lot of what I picked was basically due to what I had left available to me. So, as an example, let's go to the draft board. So I'm gonna go back to the actual Fletchender thing. Sorry, but that saved me 8 points. Is basically my whole reason for Fletchender over Talonflame, is that it saves me 8 points and it does the same job that I would have Talonflame for. So yeah, a lot of what I was drafting for wasn't necessarily anti-draft of others, but it was more so looking to, like, especially these early ones. I'm really looking to look at these top 15 plus Pokemons, like 15 plus point Pokemon, and look at these and see what I can draft early on that counters a majority of these other types. As an example, so Chiyu, Dark, and Fire, and some coverage type moves. I hit a majority, if not, well, not all, but I hit a very large majority of these Pokemon for, at the very least, neutral effective with this very high special attack stat without any investment. It's already very high base, and then there's the investment ability. And even without that investment, or rather with that investment and choice specs, it nuts. That's kind of what I'm getting at, I guess. I did initially also, to be completely upfront, did have a Meloetta instead of this Florges and this Fletchender, but I realized that Florges, it was mostly going to be a support. Where is the... Well, I needed a fairy type first and foremost. I had like no fairy types at the time, so I needed some fairy type stab, basically, to check dragons. And then Wish, very useful for switching in, switching out, whatever. It's a decent pivot mon, basically, because Fairy is very defensive in terms of other types that match into it. So I plan on using Florges more so as another, it's another pivot, but it's more of a defensive pivot rather than an offensive pivot like Deoxys I would use it as. Sorry. But, so yeah, Wish and then Moonblast is very useful. I don't really see me using it as a setup sweeper unless I'm going up into a team that is dragon heavy. Alternatively, I do plan on, I forget what the Pokemon, or what the move is. I think it's Aromatherapy, but it essentially heals all of my team's status conditions. So if I were to go up into someone who has something like a Serene Grace Jirachi, planning on paralyzing my entire team using Body Slams that have 60% chance to paralyze me, that's okay with me. You're going to lower my speed for a turn or two, and then I'm going to switch out as soon as I see that 2 of my Mons, or 1 or 2, depending on how important these Mons are. I'm going to switch out into Florges, and then once I have this Florges out, I'm going to Aromatherapy. Once I Aromatherapy, it heals all the other ones, and I'm not super concerned with my Florges' speed in the first place, because it's not the greatest as it is. It's decent, but not great. So I really plan on using Florges as a defensive pivot and a support Pokemon, even though it is singles. You don't typically think of Pokemon, really, I don't think, at least as a support. It's typically you're either doing it as a wall, as a setter, or as an offensive lead, those sorts of things. But I truly do plan on using Florges as a support, because Wish can switch me out into a different Pokemon after using Wish. Alternatively, Just aromatherapy is very useful. So it's very, I think it's a very nice tool to have, essentially, in the proverbial toolbox, to have this just very defensive Pokemon. If I see a Pokemon that I match up well into with my fairy typing, I'm going to switch in my Florges and then Wish, and then see what you switch into if you do, once I switch my Florges in. And then I'm switching out Florges into whatever matches up well. Regardless of my HP, I know that I'm getting healed the following turn because Wish carries over to the Pokemon that I'm just switching in right now. So it's that sort of thing where, again, it's similar to Fletchinder in that these two are very much planned to be support Pokemon. Whereas Deoxys Speed can be either a setup sweeper or, as more realistically, an offensive pivot for me. Ursaluna, offensive lead, or just a sweeper. Buzzwole, ideally a physical sweeper, because of its beast boost. I'm not going to try and intentionally sack it or whatever unless I absolutely have to win the game. It's that sort of thing where Buzzwole has that beast boost bonus, doubling its attack after 2 KOs, and then from there it can kind of run away with the game. It's that sort of thing. So I do think that, again, matchup-wise, I believe I'm weak currently to ground and maybe fighting. I believe I'm also weak to Ghost, but I'm not super sure about Ghost. But those are, like, I want to say 3 of our toughest matchups, but I still have Pokemon that resist these types. It's just that on average, I have a negative matchup into these, where I would, realistically, if I know you're bringing these Pokemon in an attempt to check me, or if you're majority of these Pokemon, odds are that I'm not bringing my Pokemon that are going to be weak into your team as part of my prep. It's that sort of thing where it's like, I'm trying to think of ahead, but I also want to cover as many of my matchups as I can in advance during the draft. So that was a lot of my thought process, at least during draft. We're still waiting on the week 1 matchups. I plan on hopefully recording my own reviews over these weeks and my piloting, because I do know that at the very least I used to have a very bad habit of not taking my time with choosing my moves and taking my time with thinking things through rather than the immediate intrinsic, I see this very powerful move, I'm not going to calc it, I'm just going to hit it, and then a lot of the times it's either they outspeed me and they hit me with a type coverage move and I die, or I still outspeed them, but it doesn't deal as much damage as I would hope because I didn't calc it, and then they return or they do some other move that checks me for attacking them during an inopportune moment with a essentially incorrect Pokemon, because I thought I would be able to beat them. But if I had calced it, I would have known. So my plan is, going forwards, I do plan on reviewing my own games week by week, hopefully. So yeah, anyways, that was my thoughts on the current draft, at least for my own team, and the counters of one specific other team, because I think a lot of the other teams are very straightforward rather than the stall team. Stall team is very unconventional in draft from what I've seen and what I've heard. I've played it once, or rather piloted draft once, and that was the one time that I drafted previously, and the only time I've drafted previously, so, and I didn't do it very well. I do plan, again, like, this was essentially, Hoopa wasn't necessarily there to check draft or check stall initially. It just happened that I had drafted Hoopa early enough on, and then the other player who was building stall chose to stick with it. And then Gothitelle kind of, I feel, as a Shadow Tag user, which we recently unbanned, or rather they recently unbanned, very useful, especially if there is any Pokemon that I have who may know Parasong, those sorts of things, other setup moves, or if I switch into a good Pokemon that I know I'm defensively well into, or if they aren't a Terra Pokemon, and I know I am bulky enough into that I can just set up, and then rest, and then sweep their team with a +6 Gothitelle, basically, using Calm Mind or what have you. So yeah, Sorry, I've tried to end this 3 times and I go off on another rant. Anyways, that was hopefully my final thoughts on my current draft situation. I might change off Pokemons here and there through the free agent system that we have in AFG. But this is the start of the newest draft, and this is the start of hopefully me staying and sticking with Pokemon for a little bit at the very least, because after going on to Pokemon Showdown and actually taking the time to think about these things, before even having participated in a actual battle during this current draft season, I'm already having fun just taking my time and thinking about type matchups and physical versus special defense matchups and those sorts of things that I admittedly didn't think of back when I used to during my one draft season 3 years ago, or in the technically the same league but also a different league because it went through a different name at the time. Then it was essentially transferred over. But anyways, yeah, that was my thoughts on my current team in AFG Draft League. In Little Root is the name of the actual like league tier itself currently. I do think in retrospect some more physically defensive Pokemon would definitely aid me. So I might end up doing a free agent transaction for one of those potentially. But for now, yeah, for now I think it's all good. I'm going to go week 1 and see how that plays out, because I still have my 5 free agent transactions outside of the first 3, because we have that 1 day, 24-hour, essentially free transactions through free agent using whatever's left on the board. So, yep. I think that's the 5th time that I've tried to end the video, so I'm going to actually do it this time. Thank you for stopping in and all that fun stuff. Peace.